Okay, I'm going to go through the answers to the January 2015 Biology Paper 1. Obviously use this in conjunction with the mark scheme that you might have, and just hopefully to kind of clear up any questions you might have. Go through a question at a time, starting with question 1. So question 1 is all about hormones, about their roles and what they do. You've got to complete the table stating the name of the hormone and link to the effect given in the first column. First row has been done for us, we can take a look at that. Insulin is telling us converts glucose to glycogen. We know we do that when blood sugar increases after a meal. Normally, our body acts to lower the blood glucose level by converting that glucose in the blood into glycogen, which can be stored. That hormone insulin does that, comes from the pancreas, okay? That's our first line, so we know what we need to do. The second line there, okay, we're telling the effect is a hormone that stimulates the secondary mammary characteristics to develop, and that comes from the testis. We should know that the hormone causing secondary male characteristics is, of course, testosterone. Okay, and by secondary male, secondary characteristics, that's not genitalia, that's other characteristics associated with men there. Hormone going to increase the permeability, so allowing more water to be reabsorbed, is ADH, okay, standing for antidiuretic hormone, and that comes from a part of the brain called the pituitary gland. Pituitary gland, that's where it's released from. It's actually made in the hypothalamus, and therefore either of those was accepted as an answer. Pituitary glands where it's stored and released from, made in the hypothalamus. Okay. Lastly, and this is probably the line that most people got wrong, was which hormone repairs the uterus lining. The hormone that repairs the uterus lining is estrogen. Okay. A lot of you put progesterone. The role of progesterone, if you remember, is to maintain the lining of the uterus that has been built up during the sort of second half of the menstrual cycle. Then the reason it builds up that uterus lining is that should a fertilized egg embed, it's going to get supplied with the nutrients it needs. If it doesn't get embedded with a fertilized egg, that uterus lining obviously sheds, and that is menstruation, which will end and begin the new menstrual cycle there. And estrogen comes from the ovaries themselves. Okay, that's where the source of it is from, is released by the ovaries, as opposed to LH and FSH, which come from the pituitary gland. Estrogen comes from the ovaries there. Next question B, not many people got this right that hadn't obviously looked at the mark scheme to do it. Cells do not store glucose, instead it's converted to glycogen to be stored. Suggest why cells do not store glucose. Well, in order to answer that, you need to understand a couple of things. Firstly being that glucose is soluble, meaning it can dissolve in a solution, like the cytoplasm of the cell, whereas glycogen is insoluble. It doesn't dissolve. Behaves in a sort of very similar way to starch. That's going to benefit a cell because if we just imagine the structure of a cell down here, okay, if the concentration of glucose begins to increase in that cell, what's going to happen is the water potential inside that cell gets lower. Water is going to flood in to that cell, and that could eventually cause that cell to swell and burst. If the cell instead chooses to store, so it wants the glucose, it's not going to get rid of it, it's not going to excrete it, the cell needs it later on. So by converting it to glycogen into this insoluble insoluble carbohydrate, it's not going to dissolve in solution, therefore it's not going to lower the water potential, therefore water isn't going to move in to that cell. Okay, so the simple way to state that, as we can see on the mark scheme, is because glucose is soluble, whereas glycogen is insoluble. By converting it to glycogen, it's not going to affect the osmotic balance of the cell, and by that we mean water coming in, potentially causing it to burst. Okay, last question. The graph shows the changes in the relative level of glucose, glycogen, insulin before and after a meal. So we know there's 3 lines. The question asks us which one of these letters shows the level of glycogen. Well, we know that glycogen is stored, is a sort of storage of glucose. So we have to have glucose before we can convert it to glycogen. So glycogen levels are only going to increase after glucose levels have, and therefore the glucose gets converted. So if we look at these 2 lines, okay, the meal was taken down here, okay, and then relatively quickly these 2 lines increase. They more or less overlap themselves. What we're seeing here is an increase in the insulin levels, which almost, so that just happens first. Sorry, that wouldn't be insulin there. Not an increase in insulin level. First, we're going to get an increase in insulin glucose, because glucose is digested from complex carbohydrates. So complex carbohydrates are broken down. They then get absorbed in the small intestine as glucose into the bloodstream. That then triggers the insulin to be released. This sort of increase in blood glucose levels is getting absorbed. That causes the pancreas to release insulin. Insulin then is going to start bringing down the levels of glucose and bringing up the levels of glycogen as glucose is converted into glycogen. So X is our answer there.